by the light, the lantern, by unknown. From Adventures into the Unknown number 3, February 1943. Shadows in the night. What a spot to be in. Almost midnight, the rain falling as he trudged down a lonely street in a strange town, lost. Martin Hall regretted the impulse that had made him stop off for a visit to an old school chum. This was the street, but it was too dark to make out the numbers of the houses. Martin stopped before one of them. It wasn't a cheerful-looking place, with its windows staring out like blind, ominous eyes, but maybe he could ask directions here. There was a long wait until the door creaked open. He could dimly perceive a man and woman on the threshold, dressed in strange, outmoded clothing. "Could you direct me to Henry Travers' house?" he asked. He was amazed to see them whisper together, but finally the man answered. "Mr. Travers lives here," he said, "but he won't be back for an hour." Said, "Why don't you come in and wait for him?" It was good to get out of the howling rain. Martin was amazed to find that the house was lit by a single old oil lantern. By its fitful gleam, he studied his host and hostess, wondering who they were. They were a sinister pair, the man with fierce, staring eyes and the woman with a lean, cat-like face. Finally, the man spoke. "We're glad you happened by," he said, his voice hollow and far away. There's a window down the cellar that we can't get closed, and the rain's coming in. Could you come down and help us close it?" Martin wanted to say that he wouldn't go down into that cellar for anything in the world, but before he knew it, the men had seized the lantern, and they were on their way. The cellar was a ghostly nightmare of darkness. "Where's the window?" he stammered, but only a mocking cackle answered him. His host handed the old lantern to him, carefully, as if he were almost afraid of it, and suddenly Martin saw that he was standing at the edge of a deep pit, and he saw the woman moving close, a long knife in her hand. A shriek of fear burst from his lips. He had no weapon to save him, but he hurled the lantern. There was a ghastly, terror-stricken cry as it burst in their faces, and suddenly they disappeared. Martin never knew how he got out of the cellar, how he fled from the old house. There was a gap in his consciousness. All he knew was that suddenly it seemed to be morning, and he was wandering past the identical spot. But there was no house there. All that was left were blackened old foundations, as if a terrible fire had occurred there many years ago. A passerby supplied directions to the home of his friend, Henry Travers, and there, as if casually, Martin asked the story of the cold ruins. And he learned that a half-century ago, a man and woman had dwelled in the house that stood there, and that, according to local legend, people who came to call on them were never heard of again. They would lure them to the cellar, where they would murder and then bury them. The story had come out when their house was destroyed by fire. In the act of burying a victim, they had dropped the lantern and were destroyed in the quick-spreading flames.
And so, our terrifying tale comes to a ghastly close, a haunting reminder that cultural norms are but a graveyard of forgotten values. The creepy attitudes, blood-curdling language, and spine-tingling customs depicted herein may send shivers down your spine, but remember, they're part of our shared nightmare. This story is screaming to be shared, proudly presented in the public domain, where it will linger like a ghost, free to possess your imagination. Farewell, dear victim. Dear reader, may our tale leave you dying for more.